Hello everybody and welcome to another video. So, I had a pretty interesting question in one of my Q&A videos that went up last week, asking me what I would like to see in Feature Pack 3. Now, I kind of prattled out a very quick response there, but the more I've been thinking about it, the more I've been getting excited about things that could be coming up for Guild Wars 2, things that could improve the game even further, and of course, a lot has changed recently, especially with first-person camera coming in the game, the FOV slider finally coming in the game, with Heart of Thorns, them addressing things like condition issues, touching up on the way stability works in the game, and much more. So already a lot has changed about the game, combined with Feature Pack 1 and 2. What is left? As soon as I really sat down and started thinking about it for myself, I did come up with 10 pretty solid things I would love to see come in the game for a Feature Pack 3. Now, this supposed Feature Pack 3 would be something before Heart of Thorns, okay? So, Heart of Thorns is going to change so much. It's adding leaderboard-based stuff, which I've been asking for a long time with the adventures. It's adding many things that can completely change what I'd want from a Feature Pack. So, instead, we're just going to do a top 10 Feature Pack 3 stuff before Heart of Thorns. These are the top 10 things I would like to see come into Guild Wars 2 right now, as of at least that I brainstormed over a matter of a couple of hours tonight, anyway. I will clarify as well at the start of this video, before we jump in, dungeon changes I would consider beyond Feature Pack level now. I have so many ideas, and I've read so many cool ideas and seen so many cool ideas about dungeons, that I think they should just get their own update completely. You know, this is the dungeon update that manages to fix them and makes them more rewarding and more challenging and fun to play. So I haven't really talked about dungeons in this list, and also I believe that some kind of a skill and trait balance change for the existing classes would also be really nice, but I'm not going to talk about that here. I would desperately like us to have one more big balance overhaul for the existing classes before Heart of Thorns. As soon as Heart of Thorns comes in, we've got all the specializations, and they're going to steal the limelight. They're going to throw all the balance out of whack, and they're going to be getting all the tweaks in the future, and that saddens me a bit. There's still a lot of terrible traits across all of the classes, and just generally unfun utility skills, classes of utility skills that are neglected across all three game types that I would love to see be touched before Heart of Thorns came out. But again, that's kind of beyond the Feature Pack for me. So let's start with number 1, an overhaul to the title system. So what do I mean by this? Titles are, in theory, a very, very cool part of the game. GW1 in particular, there was a lot of weight on titles. It was once again another cosmetic-based game, but I remember most of the things I was ever grinding for that I got very excited about were titles back in the game. I wanted a cool, flashy title to appear under my name that everyone would look at. Whenever you met someone in-game, you'd always be checking out their title, see what's going on. Guild Wars 2 titles have always been a bit lame. Now, they're much better now than they were at launch. At launch, you could hardly see them at all. Now, they do at least appear under character names of people who wander past you, but still the system's kind of rubbish. Why is it a rubbish system? Because there's so many of them at this point. I think that the system could do with an overhaul of sorts, and in particular the main feature of any overhaul to the title system I would propose would be creating colored titles and tearing them off. So right now, if I try and browse a title, currently I'm repping Golden, and I have this enormous list of tons of titles that I've accrued through both GW1 and GW2, and I have no real way of knowing beyond just what the name of the title is, which are the really badass ones, which are the cool ones, which are the ones that had a lot of effort put behind them. Volunteer was a really basic, stupid title we could get when the Living World first began from pressing F at a couple of signs. That is a very different title to, for example, Worm's Bane, which is only acquirable through one of the hardest open world PvE events they have. And what do we have as players to really see this differentiation? Nothing. Titles are there, surely, to show off to one another, right? It shouldn't just come down to which one reads the prettiest or has, you know, the prettiest word that fits the theme of your character. I want to see these actually be a means of showing off once again. So my main proposal would be you take these and you would give them tiers. You would copy the tier system we already have in Guild Wars 2, and titles would then be displayed under your name in that respective color. So you'd have white titles. Volunteer, one of the easiest titles I've ever come across in the game. This would be a white title. Something that was a little bit more difficult to get, say for example the Tormentor, kill a lucky boss out in the Silver Wastes, this would be a blue title. This was slightly more challenging to get. Then you would have green titles too, perhaps the be-all and the end-all for killing all of these bosses in the Silver Wastes. How about then the Blazing Light? This we could only get for defeating Liadri the Concealing Dark in the Crown Pavilion, a notoriously difficult skill-based event. Well, this could perhaps then be a rare title. Then we can look at even more insane objectives? What about like our rare collections, for example? Dungeoneer. This title I got for getting every single skin, armor and weapon from every single dungeon in the game. This took a lot of effort. Maybe Dungeoneer should be an exotic tiered title. This is what I would propose. They would be banded up, and not only would this allow us to show off a bit better, make them a bit more notable as we look at one another around the world, but actually it would be easier to sort too, because you'd have the white titles appear at the top, then the blue ones, green ones, and so on. This isn't where it would end for me though, some kind of a title overhaul. I would also like to see a bunch of new titles be added to the game. I'd like to see titles associated with the weapon slayers. If you manage to finish all of these weapon master things, we should get a title for this. Some of the achievements in the game are just plain broken right now. The giant slayer, for example, should either have the amount of giants it requires to complete lowered massively, which is not what I'm really in favor for, or this should have a title associated with it for finishing it. Maybe you should get a title for finishing all of these other ones also. There's a lot of places titles can be looked at, and the achievement system in general does need to be tweaked a little. Of course, we can look at the competitive section, world versus world. These are outrageous, outlandish, almost impossible titles to get in many situations. These should be changed so that some of them actually are viable, though I am in huge favor of them being incredibly difficult to acquire. These would all be like exotic titles, for example. Many other achievements need to be brought up to par. The title here that I was originally repping, Golden, is just such a pitifully low amount of gold considering today's economy in Guild Wars 2. They should bump this up. They should move this up to 1,000 gold. Hell, I think they should add Platinum back to the game for once you get to 1,000 gold, since it's not actually that rare anymore for players to reach that cap. Golden needs to be increased. The community section needs to be looked at again. Let's have the costume brawl thing actually go much higher. I got this on like the first 2 days when costume brawl was first added to the game. Let me feel like I'm still working on stuff once I go back into costume brawl now. Again, keep tracking my stats here. I would love to see that pretty much universally across all these things, and a bunch of new community ones added also would be very nice. Beyond that, also, I'd like to see the concept of revocable titles being added to the game. These would be titles that you can earn from really excelling at something, but you could lose. Almost like a pseudo leaderboard system. Let's look again at, for example, the Slayer category of achievements. What if these didn't just cap at 1,000 kills? I think these should continue being tracked and climb even once you do max out tier 4 of 4. And I think the player with the most scales that they've slain in the entire game, perhaps they get a unique title just for them, an ascended title that they are the Scale Slayer, and this can be revoked. If somebody else surpasses them, then they can lose this. And again, there are many places and many achievements in the game that this could be applied to, and this would be a really cool way for players to say, hey, I want to be like the expert of this one weird little thing in the game. I want to really go for this one thing, and then they have some way of showing that off to everyone around them. Just imagine the first time you see someone with an ascended title and knowing that it's some unique, awesome, very rare thing, and then maybe you end up asking them how they ended up getting it. That would be cool, not just for the person who got the title, but for everyone around them who ends up noticing it and is impressed by it. Currently the title system is okay, but it's very plain, it's very boring, and it could be way better and way closer to what we saw in other MMOs, and particularly for me, the first game. Number 2, and this is a big one, Dueling. Oh yes, or Dueling. A lot of people seem to think when I'm talking about this that I'm saying dueling as in the crafting. No, dueling has become a really big important feature for me. For a long time I've said, you know, I'd rather see other stuff come into the game before this, but now that we're at this kind of very robust point, now that we've seen ArenaNet have given way on some of these things like first-person camera that it seemed they would never do before, I will no longer hesitate to dream of a Guild Wars 2 where we actually can duel one another. So this is a staple feature we see in many other MMOs. Guild Wars 2 has never had the ability to walk up to anyone you like in PvE right then and there and initiate in some kind of battle with them. People might tell you that world versus world is enough, but frankly I don't believe that to be true. World versus world, you can of course only duel against people in the other 2 servers against you, not even your own server. So if you have some friend in like T5 and you're in a T1 world versus world matchup, then you're never going to be able to do that. You'd just met in the Silver Wastes. Plus, it's an annoying effort to have to go all the way into World vs. World and organize some place to meet. It's not exactly an ideal situation to have people meeting to do these duels when they're not really participating in the generic World vs. World game type. And that can cause animosity amongst those in World vs. World and queuing for World vs. World who really do want to play it for World vs. World. We should be able to fight one another. I've always wondered why ArenaNet have hidden away from this. I think it's some kind of core philosophy they have about how we should always see one another as friends, but I don't see why we couldn't have a dueling feature and an option that says automatically ignore all incoming duel requests, and if they want to keep this friendly, happy community environment, then perhaps this option should be enabled by default. So people have to go out of their way to allow duel requests to come in, and then they can participate in this side of the game. The truth is that balance in PvE compared to PvP is very different. Some of us do want to be able to battle with our PvE gear and using our food and using the alternate balance that this area provides us, and interacting with one another in this way I think would go a long way. Any MMO should be encouraging players and giving players opportunities to interact with one another. Guild Wars 2 has always felt like a game where there's a lot of people around you, but you're not really playing with them. Well, you give people more options like this, and they will start communicating more, they will start talking to one another, they'll make more friends, more memories. I think dueling is incredibly important, and the thought that they might not be adding it to PvE just because they want to force and funnel people into the competitive PvP side of the game is kind of ugly to me. I mean, isn't that format kind of standing on its two legs now? Wasn't a while back the whole point to start merging everything together and make it one cohesive game instead of locking stuff off to the heart of the mists? The other reason perhaps that maybe they haven't added dueling before is if you think about areas like Divinity's Reach, where everybody crowds around the bank and the trading post, maybe they don't like the idea of suddenly all these skill effects and crazy nonsense going off as people keep inviting one another to duels in these locations. And if that is true, I think that's a valid criticism of the feature, but again, they can work around this by designating very specific areas in PvE where you will then be allowed to duel. Maybe dueling in these already incredibly populated areas isn't something they should do. Maybe they can take this hands-on and use this as an opportunity to incentivize people to go to areas of the open world they don't often travel to. For example, I happen to know in Gendaran Fields, near the entrance to Queensdale, is an arena pit there, and wouldn't it be cool if players could actually use this arena pit that supposedly has been under construction for so long to duel one another? Now we've incentivized people to head out here to Gendaran Fields, and not just the people participating in the fights, but perhaps people who want to spectate them too. And there's loads of places like this in Guild Wars 2. The Black Citadel has a massive arena built into it that would be perfect for allowing players to go and participate in dueling. One idea that particularly excites me is using the locations of the old Guild Wars 1 arenas, where again we could PvE within PvE, and using these as dueling spots. So you could go to Yak's Bend once again in Frostgorge Sound in Guild Wars 2, and up there at Yak's Bend you can start dueling people in that old arena type area. I was looking even at that shaman's historical guide to Tyria and noticed that down near Blood's Tide Coast is an island in the Sea of Sorrows that just so perfectly happens to match up in Guild Wars 2 with the old arena we would participate, the old Crichton Arena, very early Guild Wars 1 days we used to participate in. Wouldn't it be cool if they opened that up again, and perhaps this could be a dedicated dueling location out for PvE for players to visit? Maybe the idea of only having specific locations isn't quite the perfect solution, but anything would be better than what we currently have, which, let's face it, is nothing. Number 3 is a pretty basic thing for me. It's, I want more collections, rare collections, difficult collections. There's a lot of things in Guild Wars 2 that would serve as perfect collections, and ArenaNet don't seem to have offered us. So I would like to see a collection for the Zenith weapon skins, which we get for acquiring achievement points. I would like to see a collection for finishing off Radiant and Hellfire sets. I'd like to see a collection for finishing even the Pinnacle weapons. These incredibly rare achievement point tied weapons that we get after Zenith stuff. I'd like to see collections come into the game for the Aetherpath weapons. This is an incredibly expensive set of weapons that would go perfect as some kind of a rare collection for us. And even, and I'm sure that they considered this, considering they had Ascended Armor as a collection originally, I would like to see collections be added for all the craftable Ascended weapons. The next feature I'd like to talk about kind of ties into this, that I would love to see. This is an overhaul to the wardrobe. Now, the wardrobe was a really fantastic feature when it was added to the game, but it has always had a few issues thorns in its side that have always sincerely disappointed me. Number one, and the most important thing I want to see change with the wardrobe, is I want to see Black Lion skins, that's weapons and armor, given their own sections. The coolest thing about the wardrobe was the idea that we would max out certain sections. We'd say, alright, look, I want to take my heavy headgear, I don't want to get every single one in the game. You know, I've thought of this many times for light headgear, but it doesn't take long for me to scroll along to see, oh wait, the aviator cap, damn, that's just a gem store thing, that's kind of annoying. Oh, the fuzzy bear hat, the fuzzy cat hat, the fuzzy leopard hat, a bunch of boring gem store related stuff that doesn't really feel satisfying to go for, things that we may not even be able to purchase on the gem store anymore. Particularly, this is incredibly pertinent when it comes to weapons. You have things like Marjorie's dagger and so forth. This is just frustrating. The Black Lion stuff should be in its own section down at the bottom, and if people want to complete those as a collection, then let them go for that. And yes, collection, that's exactly what I mean. Once they've moved the Black Lion stuff to where it belongs on its own, they can then give us new collections such as you got every single hammer skin in the base game. And with Heart of Thorns releasing and new skins coming as a part of Heart of Thorns, then these do not have to necessarily be tied with that collection. This would be fantastic, and there are so many different things to go for here. I think it would keep a lot of people busy for a very long time. Right now, though, our only incentive is personal joy of seeing these things, these panels be filled in, and it is damn hard and unfair when they are flooded with Black Lion stuff. Moving on, that's not all I've got to say for the wardrobe. Miniatures 2 are a mess. Miniatures appear all in one huge chunk. Now again, the mini update was great, but these things need to be given their own sets. Let us sort these by set as we would with anything else. I want to see set 1 minis appear, I want to see set 2 minis appear, set 3 minis, and then I want to be able to browse through the other seasonal minis that they've been added, or minis from the Black Lion store again be put off into their own section. And lastly, a section for minis that can be acquired in-game, not necessarily through the Black Lion gem store. So with just these couple of changes for the wardrobe, players coming in for Heart of Thorns are going to start noticing these features, and they're going to go wrapped up as they want to finish all of them, and that's a really cool thought to me. They're close to being to where they need to be, but they're not quite the whole way there. Number 5, build templates. Oh yes, so this is a very big one. This is going to be on a lot of people's lists, especially with Heart of Thorns coming out and it looking like both Stronghold and Conquest, and I suppose Courtyard, all going to be occupying the same queue. I think the necessity and the importance for build templates is greater than ever. This is something that affects me pretty much every day. I have 3 builds that I frequently run on my Elementalist. I have this healing power build that I run when I'm going around doing pointless open world stuff. I have a PvE staff build which I'm constantly swapping to, and then I have a very bursty, very glassy scepter focus build that I like to run when I go to World versus World. The amount of times that I run into my trait panel, even though yes, now it is free, and try to reset these things, swap my weapons around, swap my armor around, swap my trinkets around, is frustrating. It would be nice if we could have another tab, perhaps down here, so we got equipments, traits, and then saved builds here, where we can just click through, and then we have a nice long list of all the builds we've ever created for our Elementalists. We click them, and away we go. This would add so much to the game, not just the quality of life and convenience of swapping through builds we know we already like, but even for people who want to craft builds and are slowly working on them over long periods of time. They can just save them down there, and when they want to tweak a little bit more, they can click back into their new work in progress build and play around with it a little some more before returning back to the stuff that they already know is viable. Think about beyond that, the ability to quickly share builds and get other people's stuff. You could go to a website like MetaBattle, and in a couple of clicks, boom, you'd have the entire build set up for yourself. What about when you're in a dungeon run and you're doing a pug and you see someone is running around with their staff on their guardian? You say, hey, could you please run this instead of there being a lot of animosity, people getting frustrated from having to explain themselves constantly. Make sure that everyone has not just the right trait point allocation, but the actual correct trait slotted as well. Well, in the future, that could be a thing of the past. You just give them something they can click there within game, and boom, the build is saved, loaded on for them, and away they go. This would add so much to the game. The same with Necromancer for me. You've seen a bit of in this video. I like to play Power Necromancer. I like to play Minion Master Necromancer. I like to play Condition Mancer. I've been playing all with Vampirism Necromancer. These are annoying builds to constantly swap through. This was a feature that was added to Guild Wars 1 a long time ago. Many of the features that we've seen come in through feature packs and elsewise since Guild Wars 2's launch have just been bringing them back up to par with GW1, and this remains as one of the last big things. Come on, ArenaNet, we need them. Build templates. Super important. Number 6, effect slider. Now, this is not something I would expect many people to appreciate or really want, but it's been something I've always wanted for GW1 and 2, and I would love to see them finally address it. This is the way that ArenaNet deal with their sound options. And hear me out here. In particular, the effects volume has always been very frustrating to me. See, effects to ArenaNet include all kinds of things. Mostly effect would be combat sounds. So right now, if you listen to me casting, for example, a Windborne Speed,
accelerating,
the volume sounds around about okay, quite low, because I've got this turned down quite low. What happens is if I have effects volume maxed out, and then I use some kind of a combat ability, they're much, much, much louder and overpower pretty much everything else that the game has to offer. So I turned this down. The problem is, though, that they have bundled into the effects slider a lot of other ambient and really great immersive sound effects that I then never get to hear because I have to turn it down lest the combat sounds drown everything else out. So a really great example of one of these sound effects, footsteps. I haven't heard footsteps in Guild Wars 2 for God knows how long. If I walk around right now, oh, I actually get to hear them, and I get to hear them change as I walk on different materials, as I walk around on, say, this wooden fence, as I walk around on this gravel, as I walk around on this grass. This is something that I quite enjoy, and immersion is very important to me in this game. But I can never listen to this, because to hear these sound effects, I need to have incredibly loud attunement swapping that I have to be shouting over constantly and destroying everything else. What I want to see them do is split the way that they handle their audio volumes and have not just an effects volume, but have a combat effects slider, and then perhaps a miscellaneous effects slider too that affects things like footsteps and other immersive qualities. This has always been frustrating, and I think it's finally time it makes its way onto one of my lists. Number 7, this is something you guys have heard me talk about before, hard mode world bosses. Absolutely, this is still on my list. This is still very high on my list as well as one of my most desired things for Guild Wars 2. A while ago, ArenaNet added the ability for players to pop certain world bosses. As a part of a guild that frequently kills the Triple Trouble Worm and Tequatl, we've got massive use out of this, but I can't help but be sad by the fact many of these events are simply too easy. Especially look at many of the vanilla events that have never been touched up. Things like the Shatter are one of these powerful, awesome looking dragon bosses with perhaps interesting mechanics around it to do with the mortars and the turrets that everyone just ignores and can do barely any damage. These things need to be touched up, and I would love to see these hard mode events be added and poppable by guilds. If we want to go back to a Triple Trouble Worm encounter that had the same balance and difficulty as the original Triple Trouble Worm had, allow the guilds with the resources to be able to spend their merits on that. This is something I've desperately wanted for a long time, and you could even enable pugs as well, and pug groups, once you've killed perhaps the generic boss, to within a brief period of time pop a second version of it, the hard mode version, and see how players fare. We also have Dry Top, we have the Silver Wastes, we have many new maps coming with Heart of Thorns that will have these big map-wide themes around them. It would be really cool if we could pop, you know, a hard mode Vine Wrath, or if we could get into a tier 7 Sandstorm that has extra bonus stuff that's incredibly difficult to defeat. Even if it was something as simple as scaling numbers, I think it's much better than nothing, and provides a lot of content for guilds and groups to participate in Guild Wars 2, which still, even with guild missions, many of which haven't been updated for a long time, is very much lacking in the game. Number 8, a racial skill rebalance. So, everyone out there has a race, everyone out there has a bunch of slot skills that they ultimately will buy that are completely useless or have very, very, very little use in the game. ArenaNet have been under a catch-22 where they decided that many of their racial skills they wanted to be weaker than class skills. And this was to kind of break that MMO convention where people are constantly wanting to re-roll their character because they feel like they can't complete content because they were the wrong race or something. They didn't want that experience, so they deliberately made all the racial skills weaker. Fine in theory, but it does mean that many of them won't work at end game. This is particularly weird when you see that they decided to add 3 regular racial skills for every class and then 3 elites. So half of them are actually supposed to be elite skills. The problem with elite skills is they're supposed to be massive, game-changing, swingy effects. And how does that work if they're also supposed to be weak because they don't want to encourage people to use them and then have to reroll races? ArenaNet have been in a catch-22. I say it's time that they reassess what they want these skills to be, and I would like to see them all be buffed. I would like to see them actually have some importance to the game. We do already see in some situations, for what it's worth, these racial skills are incredibly powerful. The Sylvari one, for example, that makes you invulnerable is a very powerful tool, especially in certain world versus world scenarios, and can be great on pretty much any class. And many of the human ones are pretty powerful too. In some situations, Prayer to Dwayne is actually one of the best heals depending on the class that you're playing. Hounds of Balthazar too aren't too shabby. And then you get other races like Asura. I love Asurans, but all their racials are terrible. Who would ever want to get in a power suit? People summon it as a joke. I want to see this being an actual thing. And if ArenaNet later, after buffing these skills, become concerned they have too strong of a place, then nerf them to fit. Don't start them as pretty much useless skills and then leave them that way for 3 years. Love to see some kind of a balance to all the racial skills. I'd love to see a reason to summon that little druid pet on my Sylvari. I'd love to be able to turn myself into an Okar as a human or into Grenth. I'd love to be summoning the Charzuka and have real reason to. This would add a lot to the game and make it a lot more fun to level, frankly, for new players who see these skills. And, you know, one of them is always the top tier, and to actually know that it would have some really good use would be cool. Their plans to make them balanced by having them weak hasn't even been fully realized when you do have some as powerful as, like, the invulnerability skill take root. Number 9, meaning for the orders. Now, there's a lot of ways that ArenaNet could do this. I do think it's about time this was addressed. One of the coolest things people like to do when they start playing an MMO is choose a faction of sorts. And yes, ArenaNet don't want factions that are vying and fighting against one another, like Alliance versus Horde or anything in their game, but they did appreciate the value of picking an order, of identifying with one faction more than the others, and these are useless. They mean nothing for your character outside of the personal story, and they mean nothing for endgame, and I think they fit wonderfully into the way Guild Wars 2's PvE works if ArenaNet just give them a little bit of attention. I would propose some kind of a faction system for the 3 orders. Depending on the order that you choose, you can return to these areas after completing the personal story. I would say these areas should become, rather than instances, actually open world places where you can interact with a bunch of other players who, say, chose Order of Whispers or chose the Dermot Prairie, chose the Vigil, and you can talk about how awesome your order is together. But you should be able to earn faction with these people by essentially repping them and then going out and completing events and doing your ordinary stuff, your champion trains, your world boss farms, whatever you might be happening to do that day. And this would allow you to earn faction and influence with these groups, similar perhaps to how we earned Kurzik or Luxem faction in the first game. And this faction can then be exchanged for discounted rewards, unique rewards, skins, armor, weapons, perhaps in addition to what's already available from specific NPCs available here. And again, if with Heart of Thorns they have decided that PvE leaderboards in the way of adventures are fine, then maybe they should allow people to compete for, or guilds even, to ally with one of the specific factions, just as we could in Guild Wars 1, and we could see which guilds, you know, are the biggest Order of Whispers guilds, or the biggest Diamond Priory and Vigil guilds, and by being in this position, you unlock perks and bonuses, guild bonuses, as we already currently have systems for in the game, for the players of those guilds. I think this would be awesome, tie beautifully into the Guild Hall system, and really bring this element of Guild Wars 2 back, because it's just been lying there totally disused. Another thing many players will be doing is looking to third-party websites like guildwars2timer.com, or going to get their own apps and overlays so that they can find out what world bosses are spawning on specific rotations. Why are we still having to rely on that? Why don't we have criers and people in these factions that once we reach level 80, once we come back here, will tell us at any time in-game. I could speak to this Kodan guy and he'd say, oh, you know, the Claw of Jormeg is up and tormenting people. Will you accept this bounty? We say yes, and we'll get a bit of bonus faction for going out there and killing this world boss. This would be a place that players can come once they hit 80 to find out what's going on around the world and know what to do. That question people constantly cry, what do I do at endgame? Maybe they wouldn't have to anymore if the members of their orders were telling them what to do, giving them bounties for rarely completed events or champions that haven't been killed out in the open world for a long time. Even the ability to leave messages to other members of your orders around here, such as how we have, you know, guild messages of the day or bank messages, would be really, really phenomenal. I think do so much for PvE, especially on the open world end of things. I'm sick of picking an order and having that order represented every day on my character select screen, and it means nothing. Lastly, number 10, I have the Bestiary. Now, this is an interesting feature. This has really come about because of another game I've been playing recently, an old PlayStation 2 game called Final Fantasy XII. And in Final Fantasy XII, they have something very interesting. The ability to learn about the foes you've been defeating and get real glimpses into the universe that the main story doesn't offer at all. Those of you who have been watching my channel for a very long time will recall an old video I did about how areas of Guild Wars 2 feel hollow, and in that video I drew comparisons back to Final Fantasy XII also. What I'm talking about is the FF12 Bestiary. I love this system. I would love to see something like this come into Guild Wars 2. We saw back in the Guild Wars 2 betas that they had lore books, extra information that had been written by the devs about various enemies and compiled into these little lore chunks that players can read. Let's bring this stuff back. The FF12 Bestiary, as you guys can see here, is an incredible feature, and I would love to see this even just copy-pasted directly into GW2. It means that as you kill, say, slimes in Queensdale, you'd have a little Queensdale section of your Bestiary that would come up documenting all the foes you can find around in that map, and by selecting these you could get additional information about the oozes. You could even then chain many oozes together, and if you kill lots of them, then you unlock even further information. This information could then even provide hints and clues to players about hidden Mystic Forge recipes in the game, the creation of the old legendaries, and perhaps even the new legendary system also. ArenaNet don't really have that many opportunities to just write and talk about the universe, and from playing FF12 recently, I've realized how much extra information you can derive from the regions and the people that live there just from learning about the local flora and fauna. Really, really cool feature. I would love to see something like this for Guild Wars 2. Some kind of lore book or Bestiary system would just be the best thing ever. So there you go, guys. That's my top 10 feature pack 3 requested features or things I just want to see dropped into the game. Is there anything like massive I guess I'm missing that I didn't include that would have appeared in your list? Is there anything I'm totally wrong about you guys think that I've said here that would just break the game? I'm very curious, but these things I think would improve Guild Wars 2 in so many ways. Hopefully ArenaNet sees that too, and I guess we'll just have to find out what's in store for us before or more likely after Heart of Thorns. Thanks guys, I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.